When I stand before you, I do not speak to you merely as a psychologist dissecting structures of the mind. I speak as one who has gazed long into the abyss of the human soul and who has seen what most people refuse to face. I speak to those of you who call yourselves empaths, those who carry the pain of others in your own chest as though it were your own heartbeat. This is not a gentle reassurance. This is a final warning. For the empath who refuses to heal will forever remain chained to the hunger of others. But the empath who heals, who confronts their shadow, who gathers their fragments, who integrates both light and darkness, becomes something far more dangerous than the world expects. The empath who heals becomes the narcissist's greatest fear. Why? Because the narcissist survives only in unconsciousness. They feed on those who have not yet discovered their own power. They thrive on mirrors that bend, on souls that yield. But when an empath awakens, when they no longer bleed endlessly for the wounds of others, when they can look into their own darkness and not flinch, they radiate a presence that cannot be consumed. I tell you this, if you do not heal, you will kneel forever at doors that never open. You will pour your life into those who cannot love you. But if you heal, you will stand, you will claim, and you will walk through the final door into your own radiance. And in that radiance, the narcissist collapses. Stay with me until the end, because in part 7, I will reveal that door, the moment where the narcissist's mask falls away and their emptiness is fully exposed. You must not miss it. But first, I ask you to join me in a small act of defiance. Write in the comments, "I will not kneel at the door that never opens." Let this be your first declaration of sovereignty. And if these words already stir something in you, if you feel the truth vibrating in your bones, then like this video, subscribe to this channel, and walk with me deeper into the labyrinth of the psyche. For this is not just another message. This is the call to awaken.
Every empath's gift begins not in light, but in a scar. It is not born from ease or comfort, but from survival. Too often, we imagine empathy as a simple virtue, a shining trait given at birth. But in truth, the empath is shaped in the crucible of early wounds. Picture the infant who cries and is not heard. Picture the child who grows up in the storm of a parent's volatility, who learns to scan every flicker of expression, every tremor in the room, because their very safety depends on it. This child does not wake up one morning deciding to be sensitive. They are trained by circumstance, their nervous system sculpted by the chaos around them. What we call empathy is often the sharpened radar of survival, the ability to read moods, to anticipate conflict, to soothe others before the explosion comes. It is all written into the body of the child who once had no choice. Jung once warned us, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so the empath steps into adulthood carrying a fate they never chose, mistaking vigilance for virtue. In modern psychology, we see this reflected in what is called the fawn response, one of the survival strategies of trauma. Instead of fighting, instead of fleeing, the child learns to appease, to merge with the needs of others, to become whatever is required in order to be safe, or at least to be tolerated. I have seen it again and again. A woman raised in a household where her father drowned himself in alcohol. She became the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over every outburst, who kept the family functioning by absorbing all the tension. And when she grew into adulthood, she carried the same role into every relationship, always the fixer, always the one who gave more than she received, never realizing that her gift was also her wound. This is why we must not romanticize empathy without discernment. For many, empathy begins as a scar tissue response, the body and soul adapting to environments that were never safe. And until that scar is examined, until it is made conscious, it becomes the silent magnet that pulls empaths toward those who exploit. The narcissist does not simply choose the empath. The empath's unhealed wound calls out to the narcissist like a beacon. But hear me clearly, this is not the end of the story. The wound does not have to remain a prison. It can become the doorway. For what begins as survival can be transformed into vision. What begins as fear can become the ground of compassion. The same radar that once scanned for danger can, when healed, detect truth, authenticity, and depth. And this is why the first step of the journey is not to reject your wound, nor to hide it under the mask of endless giving, but to recognize it, to name it, to see that your empathy is not simply light, it carries the shadow of your childhood. And until you embrace that shadow, you remain prey. In Part 2, we will descend deeper into this magnetic pole, the strange dance between the unhealed empath and the narcissist who hunts them. For predators smell wounds before they see light. And if you wish to understand why you have been pursued, why you have been consumed, you must first understand the nature of that hunt.
Predators smell wounds before they see light. The narcissist is drawn to the empath not because of their strength, but because of the hidden fracture that lies beneath their compassion. The empath, who is not yet healed, carries a silent broadcast, an unconscious message that says, "I will bend, I will absorb, I will rescue." And the narcissist, hungry for mirrors, hears that signal with perfect clarity. The narcissist survives only when they are reflected. They have built a false self, a mask of superiority, and that mask requires constant polishing. Who better to polish it than the empath, who has been trained since childhood to scan every mood, to anticipate every need, to sacrifice their own reality for the comfort of others? The empath becomes the ideal mirror, responsive, pliable, endlessly giving. This is why the pairing is so magnetic. The narcissist thrives on adoration without limit. The unhealed empath thrives on giving without limit. One longs to be adored, the other longs to adore. Together, they form what Jung would call a collision of shadows, each completing the other's unconscious script, each binding themselves to the other's wound. Modern psychology names this trauma bonding. In the cycle of love bombing, devaluation, and discard, the empath's nervous system becomes addicted to the very person who is draining them. Dopamine rewards the highs, cortisol burns through the lows, and the empath mistakes the chaos for love. I recall the story of a woman who spent 12 years with a partner who dazzled her with early promises, only to gaslight her into doubting her every thought. She stayed, not because she was weak, but because her brain had been rewired to crave the very hand that harmed her. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The empath who does not heal calls their entanglement destiny, when in truth it is an unconscious pattern pulling them toward the devourer of souls. And here is the tragedy. What feels like a soulmate connection is often the echo of an old wound, replaying itself again and again. But this tragedy need not be the end. To see the pattern is to begin breaking it. To name the hunger is to begin starving the predator. And in Part 3, we will enter the descent itself, the shadow, the dream, the wolf that waits in the unconscious. For it is there, in the darkness you fear most, that the first real step toward power is found.
The dream reveals what waking life hides. When the empath begins the journey inward, they must step into a place few dare to go, the underworld of their own psyche. For healing does not happen in the sunlight of comforting affirmations. Healing begins when we descend into shadow.
Carl Jung reminded us one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And so the empath who longs to be free of the narcissist must confront not only the cruelty of the other, but the unacknowledged impulses within themselves. The rage they have hidden, the hunger they deny, the instinct they have silenced. I once spoke with a woman whose nights were haunted by a recurring vision. She stood in a vast cathedral filled with broken mirrors. As she reached to gather the shards, her hands bled, yet she could not stop. In every fragment, she saw the face of men who had promised her love and given her only silence. She believed it was her duty to piece them together. But then, in the dream, a voice thundered, "The mirrors are not yours to repair." At the altar, she discovered one unbroken mirror, and in it, her own face. This is the descent. The moment the empath stops trying to assemble the broken images of others and begins to face the fractured image of themselves. The dream had spoken what her waking mind could not yet accept. She was bleeding for illusions, and until she released them, she could never walk free. Another patient told of a dream in which he found a magnificent wolf caught in a steel trap. Compassion urged him to free it, but as he reached forward, the beast turned and sank its teeth into his hand. He woke trembling, unable to understand. I told him, "The wolf is not your partner. The wolf is your instinct. You have tried to tame it with sacrifice, to deny it for the sake of peace. But instinct denied becomes instinct that bites." For the empath, the wolf is the part of the self long abandoned, the fierce no, the animal knowing of danger, the inner warrior silenced for the sake of survival. To descend into shadow is to meet that wolf again, not as an enemy, but as a guide. Only by reclaiming instinct does empathy become power. We must understand, shadow work is not an indulgence, it is an initiation. The empath who pretends to be pure light will forever be consumed by those who sense the shadow they refuse to claim. But the empath who can walk into the darkness, who can see their own rage, their own capacity for manipulation, their own hunger for love, this one is no longer prey. They become whole. They embody what Jung called individuation, the union of opposites within the self. This descent is frightening. It feels like death because it is the death of illusions. Yet it is also the birth of sovereignty. The empath who reclaims their wolf walks the earth differently. Their eyes no longer plead. Their presence no longer signals availability to be consumed. They radiate a power that says, "I can feel you, but I will not be devoured by you." And here lies the turning point. For when the empath has met the wolf, when they have stood before the mirror and seen their own face, they rise with a strength that the narcissist cannot manipulate. In Part 4, we will see how this transformation takes shape, how the wounded healer becomes the warrior, and how boundaries rooted in instinct turn empathy from weakness into unshakable power.
Empathy without instinct is weakness. Empathy with instinct is power. This is the great turning point of the empath's journey, the passage from wounded healer to warrior. The wounded healer bleeds for others, mistaking sacrifice for love. They believe that to say no is to abandon compassion. But a healer who refuses to claim their boundaries is not truly healing, they are hiding. And the narcissist, like a skilled predator, knows exactly how to exploit that weakness. Jung taught us that no archetype is pure light. Every healer carries the shadow of the martyr,
the unconscious need to be needed. Unless this shadow is faced, the empath will remain bound in endless cycles of giving and depletion. But when instinct is reclaimed, when the wolf returns, something changes. The empath no longer defines themselves by suffering. They begin to wield compassion as a choice, not a compulsion. I recall a story of a man who spent years as the caretaker of everyone around him. At work, he answered emails late into the night, always available, never complaining. In relationships, he gave endlessly, terrified that if he set limits, he would be abandoned. But when therapy led him to confront his childhood scars, he began practicing boundaries. The first time he refused a midnight request from his boss, he trembled with fear. Yet what he discovered was revolutionary. The world did not collapse. His worth did not vanish. In fact, he grew stronger. That no became the doorway to self-respect. Boundaries are not walls. They are expressions of essence. A tree does not apologize for its roots, nor explain to the wind why it must remain grounded. It simply stands. In the same way, your no must become as natural as your yes, not defensive, not filled with anger, but firm, rooted, unshakable. This is the moment when the wounded healer becomes a warrior. Their empathy is no longer sentimental weakness. It is fierce discernment. They can listen deeply, but they also know when to walk away. They can love fully, but they can also withdraw without guilt. This balance terrifies the narcissist, for their entire strategy requires pliability. When they meet a soul that cannot bend, they are forced to confront their own emptiness. Jung once said, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." Boundaries are the roots that grow from your descent. They are the fruit of shadow work. They protect your wholeness so your compassion can be offered freely without fear of being consumed. And here is the paradox. The empath who learns to say no discovers that their yes becomes infinitely more powerful. Their presence no longer radiates desperate availability, it radiates sovereignty. And sovereignty cannot be manipulated.
The most dangerous contract is the one you never knew you signed. For many empaths, there is an invisible agreement written deep within the psyche. I will suffer, if only I can be loved. This is the unconscious bargain, and it is the chain that binds the empath to the narcissist. It begins in childhood. A boy grows up believing that if he absorbs his mother's anger, if he becomes the quiet one who never asks for too much, then maybe, just maybe, he will be worthy of her affection. A girl learns that if she tends to her father's moods, if she never pushes back, then perhaps she will be safe. These lessons become written not just in the mind, but in the body. And long after the child has grown, the bargain still whispers, endure, sacrifice, give more. Then you will be loved. The narcissist hears this whisper as clearly as a wolf hears the cry of prey. They sense the empath who is willing to suffer, and they enter the dance with precision. They give just enough attention to keep hope alive, then withdraw it to awaken the wound. The empath believes that if they can endure the cruelty, if they can pour out enough patience, then one day the love they long for will finally arrive. But that day never comes, because the bargain was never fair to begin with. Jung warned us, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. The empath often carries this burden, trying to repair wounds that are not theirs to heal. They confuse martyrdom with love, and the unconscious bargain feeds both the narcissist's hunger and their own hidden need to be needed. I remember speaking with a woman who said, Every relationship I've had feels like a test of endurance. I keep thinking that if I prove my loyalty, if I prove how much I can take, then someone will stay. She did not realize that the very act of proving was the trap. Her suffering had become her offering, and it was consumed without gratitude. To break the unconscious bargain, one must name it. One must look directly at the shadow of empathy and admit, I was giving not only from compassion, but from fear. I was sacrificing not only out of love, but to avoid abandonment. This admission is not shame, it is liberation. For once the bargain is made conscious, it loses its power. The empath who breaks the bargain discovers a startling truth. Love does not require endless suffering. Love does not arrive as a reward for endurance. Real love flows between two whole beings, not between a devourer and the one who bleeds. And here the journey shifts again. For the empath who releases this unconscious contract steps into a freedom that the narcissist cannot tolerate. The predator no longer has a willing partner. The script collapses. In Part 6, we will lift our eyes beyond the personal. We will see how this same bargain has been written into our entire culture, how we live in an age of collective narcissism, where image outweighs essence, and where the empath is praised for giving endlessly, while being quietly consumed. To understand the personal, we must now confront the cultural.
It is not only a person, it is an age. The narcissist you have known in your life is but a symptom of something far larger, a culture that worships the mask over the face, the image over the essence, the spectacle over the soul. Carl Jung once warned, the greatest danger is man's exposure to the psyche. In our time, that exposure has been magnified by mirrors that stretch across the globe. We carry them in our hands, glowing screens that reflect not who we are, but who we want the world to believe we are. This is the collective cathedral of mirrors. Social media platforms have become sanctuaries of performance, where validation is currency and attention is survival. Here, the narcissistic dynamic is no longer confined to a relationship between two people. It has become the architecture of society itself. Influencers feed on the gaze of millions, corporations profit from endless comparison, and entire generations are taught that their value lies not in authenticity, but in likes, followers, and views. And what of the empath in such a world? They are praised for their giving, celebrated for their service, but beneath the applause, they are quietly consumed. The empath becomes the perfect fuel for collective narcissism, always available, always bending, always pouring themselves into causes, movements, or institutions that rarely give back the nourishment they need. Consider the modern workplace, where loyalty is rewarded with burnout. Consider the friend who is expected to be endlessly available, the partner who is told that their love is proven only through sacrifice. These are not isolated dynamics. They are the reflection of a larger pattern. We live in a society that confuses devotion with depletion, generosity with exhaustion, and empathy with servitude. Christopher Lasch, in The Culture of Narcissism, wrote in 1979 that America was already drifting toward a society obsessed with self-display. Today, his warning has become prophecy. We inhabit an economy of attention, where even suffering is commodified, where pain itself is packaged for consumption. The empath, who has not yet healed, is swallowed by this machine, applauded for giving until nothing remains. But there is another possibility. For just as the healed empath threatens the personal narcissist, so too does the healed empath threaten the cultural system of narcissism. Every time you set a boundary, you challenge an economy built on compliance. Every time you refuse to be consumed, you weaken the machinery of exploitation. Every time you reclaim your projection, you expose the illusion that keeps others asleep. This is why your healing matters not only for your own life, but for the life of the world. The empath who heals radiates authenticity in a culture of masks. Their presence is a quiet revolution, unsettling to those who depend on deception, but liberating to those who hunger for truth. And yet the journey is not over. To truly embody this revolution, to step beyond the reach of both personal and cultural narcissism, one more step remains. In Part 7, we will approach the final door, the threshold where the narcissist's mask collapses completely, and where the empath who heals claims the treasure of themselves. It is here that the story reaches its ultimate revelation.
If you do not heal, you will kneel forever at doors that never open. This is the final warning, but also the final promise. For before every empath stands a threshold, the final door, and beyond that door lies either endless repetition or radiant freedom. I recall the dream of a man who lived his entire life serving others, never daring to claim his own desires. In the dream, he stood before a massive door carved with ancient symbols. Guarding it was a faceless figure who demanded he kneel in order to pass. Terrified, he nearly surrendered until something rose within him. He stood tall and declared, "I will not kneel. The treasure is mine by right." In that moment, the faceless figure dissolved into smoke and the door swung open. Inside was not gold, but a blazing sun filling him with light. This is the truth of the empath's journey. The faceless man is the narcissist, the internalized voice that insists you must diminish yourself in order to be loved. The treasure is not their approval, not their affection. It is you. It is your wholeness, your unbroken self waiting to be claimed. Choosing wholeness does not mean you will never feel pain again. It means pain will no longer define you. It means your love is no longer a desperate plea, but a sovereign gift. The empath who chooses wholeness becomes a mirror that does not bend, a presence that cannot be consumed. To the narcissist, such wholeness is unbearable, for it exposes their own emptiness. I have seen this transformation in those who dared to heal. They no longer apologize for existing. They no longer explain themselves endlessly. They no longer kneel at the altars of broken promises. Instead, they walk with quiet authority, their no as natural as their yes, their love as fierce as their boundaries. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This is the final door, to claim the treasure of yourself, to step into the blazing sun of authenticity. And when you do, the narcissist has no dominion. They may rage, they may flee, but they cannot conquer. For what is whole cannot be consumed. Understand this, your healing is not only personal. Each empath who walks through the final door becomes a beacon for others. Your wholeness radiates into the collective, challenging a culture of masks, weakening the machinery of illusion. You become not only free for yourself, but a presence that awakens freedom in others. So I say to you, choose wholeness. Refuse to kneel at doors that never open. Comment these words as your declaration. I claim the treasure of myself. Like this video, subscribe, and share this message, for the world is starving for such presence. And remember, the empath who heals becomes not only the narcissist's greatest fear, but humanity's greatest hope.